everybody out in America at War class. This is Mrs. Terpstra, and I'm going to try this new system with Screencastify today so that you can get these notes at home. I know it's weird for me not to be standing up in front of a class, but at least we get to give you the information. So today we're starting World War I. And like I told you, one of the things I love about this class is that we get to go into more detail than we do in a regular American history class. But I really feel like we always kind of miss World War I. Why do you think that is? Think about that a moment. It lasted as long as World War II. It definitely involved as many countries as World War II. I think part of it, at least in America, is we only fought in the last year of the war. And so a lot of history teachers, I think, say, well, we can kind of gloss through this more quickly because we're rushed for time, maybe. I don't know. But this is where you get to hear all that detailed stuff that you've always wanted to know about World War I. So let's begin, shall we? Okay, so the years of the war, 1914 to 1918 officially. Obviously, the U.S. doesn't get involved until later, just so you're aware of that. This war was the first World War in history. The first time we used all continents across the globe in one war. It had a lot of nicknames. It was called the Great War, the war to end all wars, because they never thought we would fight like this again, the war to make the world safe for democracy. And here's a tidbit for you. It was not called World War I until World War II happened, and then they realized they had to number them because we had another world war. It involved 60 nations and 6 continents. It involved so many countries. So many people were hit so hard. By the end of 1914, not only Europe was at war, but also all of Europe's colonies in Asia, Africa, and South America. So you can see why it was called the Great War for the most part. Cost tons of money, $400 billion. That is $10 million an hour, 18 million deaths. And it was the first war of the Industrial Revolution. So we're going to see some weapons that we've never seen before. And it's going to cost a lot of lives, as you can see there in our cemetery. Very sad, sad event. So let's look at the causes of the war. I always tell you to remember this for your test. Think of the isms, ISMS, the isms, okay? Our first cause is nationalism. Nationalism is pride in one's country. Now that's not bad. I'm the first one to sing the national anthem and go to the 4th of July stuff, But at this era, sometimes we had so much nationalism as a country. We thought that our ideas were better than others, so we started forcing our ideas on others. And that obviously is going to cause some problems. So you'll see some examples of that during this era. This is a great cartoon that kind of shows this aggressive nationalism and how they've created these different leaders across Europe and up in Russia, how they're kind of attacking each other. I just thought this was a really cool picture. The second cause, militarism. Militarism, the base word is military. We are glorifying military power. You're going to see countries that had small professional armies convert into large, huge standing armies, like we saw in World War II in the United States as well, and a lot of new weapons that we'll talk about on day 2. If you look at the total defense expenditure for the great powers, that would include Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy, France, Britain, and Russia, in millions of euros. Look at how it increased. 1870, they spent 94 million euros. By 1914, they've over tripled that. In 1914, they spent 398 million euros for defense. If you look at the defense expenditures from 1910 to 1914, France increased by 10%, Britain by 13%. But take a look at this. Russia increased by 39%. Germany increased by 73%. So they believed they were going to be attacked or they had to protect their country, depending on how you look at it. And you'll see today in our notes why they did believe they were going to be invaded. Our third cause, imperialism. There's a lot of people going around in their ships and they're taking over other countries and claiming them for Spain or for England or for the United States. And when you do that, that means other people might want that country as well, or they don't like the fact that you're going in and putting your nose where it doesn't belong. So this caused a lot of conflict across the globe. If you look at this map, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because that's another chapter, but notice like the brown areas were Belgian territories, the orange were French territories, and so on. So you can see there's a lot of different countries in Africa over there that are kind of fighting for territories. So let's look at the traditional rules of war in Europe. And remember, you were supposed to fight like a gentleman, right? You studied the Civil War. A lot of those apply. Number one, a country must declare war before attacking another country. No sneak attacks. Number two, each side must wear uniforms or identify themselves to each other before attacking. Soldiers wearing an enemy uniform will be shot as a spy. So you can imagine what they would think of the Vietnam War, where we didn't even know who our enemy was because they wore plain clothes just like any civilian. Number three, commanding officers were not to be targeted. Well, eventually, some of our enemies are realizing that if you take out your officer, it means that the soldiers are lost and don't know what to do. Number four, civilians, surrendering soldiers, and medical personnel will not be attacked. We will show examples where civilians are being killed. We're killing surrendering soldiers. We even saw that in the Civil War at the Fort Pillow Massacre, for example. Medical personnel, my goodness, in World War II, the Japanese actually used the Red Cross symbol on our helmets as a target. So we had to stop doing that because it was actually something they believed if they took out a doctor, that would be another how many soldiers that wouldn't be saved. So they thought it would help them win the war. Number five, hand-to-hand combat is honorable. Shooting from a distance is cowardly. Think about all you COD players out there. You love sniping each other, right? That would be considered very dishonorable at this time in history. So you had to be like fighting close up so you knew who your enemy was. And number six, soldiers must be given the opportunity to surrender honorably. You didn't shoot first and ask questions later. You had to try to give them that opportunity. So let's see how this changes the rules of war a little bit. The major players from 1940 to 1917, we had two sides. We had the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance. So let's take a look at who we've got. On the Triple Entente, we've got Nicholas II of Russia. We've got George from Britain and Pres Poincaré from France. And then later on, the United States will join this side. On the other side, we have the Triple Alliance. This included Wilhelm II of Germany. Let me move this so you can see. Victor Emmanuel of Italy, Enver Pasha from Turkey, and Franz Joseph of Austria-Hungary. Now, a couple of interesting things about this. First of all, like I told you, the U.S. was not part of the original three, which is why they called it the Triple Entente, meaning three, right? Whoops, I can't see it there. Three. Triple Alliance, 3 countries. But eventually, so many countries got involved, 60 nations, they couldn't call it the Triple Entente anymore or the Triple Alliance. So then Triple Entente went to the Allied powers name, and the Triple Alliance went to the Central powers. Italy ended up switching sides. They started on the Triple Alliance side, and then they went over with the Allied powers. Now, one of the clues I use to help out my students on this test, if you look at the word entente, I can't even say it, but it's a very French word if you say it right. And so if you remember, the French side is usually always the side that the U.S. is on. So just remember the French word is where the U.S. goes. And then the Triple Alliance or Central Powers would be the bad guys to the United States. Okay? All right. So at the beginning of this war, like I said, we didn't get involved. The U.S. wanted to remain neutral for a lot of reasons. Let's check it out. First of all, our president at the time, President Woodrow Wilson, actually gets elected on the slogan, "He kept us out of the war." It was the popular thing at the time. Why? Remember what this world is like in the US at this point. We have tons of new immigrants. In fact, my own relatives were immigrants in the 1880s, right? And many of them were German or English or Italian. So you've got all these people that are newly in America. Who do you side with? Do you side with the most people in America from whatever country? If that were the case in the Midwest, it would be Germany. If you talked about people who settled on the East Coast, you'd probably say Italy or Greece. So it was hard to choose. Okay. Second thing, we were making money. We were making so much money because we were selling to both sides of the war, which is really a naughty thing to do. Our exports increased by 500%. It's craziness. We also loaned money to both sides of the war, which is going to eventually push us a certain way. We loaned $2.3 billion to the Allies, and Germany, we loaned $27 million to help them fight the war. And as you can imagine, if you were a German soldier and you saw that your buddy just got killed by this Englishman and he was carrying a weapon that looks a lot like the one you got from America, you might get a little mad because you're basically supporting both sides. Eventually, they're going to make us choose. So let's look at the events leading to the war. First of all, I remember when I was in high school, I was told that there was a big old assassination in the Balkans. And that's why we fought World War I. And I memorized it for the test and I got it right. But I never really understood what the heck it meant and why it applied to us in the United States. The Balkans was considered the powder keg of Europe at this time. And I think I can explain why. Like I said, I was told it started with the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand in 1914. Just so that you know a little bit about this guy, Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his family are in this picture. He was the heir to the throne in Austria-Hungary, okay? And this guy, Gavrilo Princip, is the guy that assassinated him. He was a Serbian nationalist, and we'll kind of explain why he was assassinated on our next couple slides. Okay. So, like I said, I was told something happened over in the EAs, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Serbia, and that's why we fought the war. Well, I remember thinking, well, what does that have to do with the United States? It's not like they assassinated one of our people or something. Well, it's kind of like a fight after school, okay? So let's kind of walk through this. So here's what happens. Austria-Hungary annexes these two countries because they're being imperialistic. They went and they took Bosnia and Herzegovina. What they didn't understand was that Serbia, right next door to Bosnia, had wanted those territories for themselves so that they could expand further. And they're furious. They're like, what are you doing here? You're way over there in Austria. You don't need this territory. So the Archduke goes to visit his new territory. He goes and visits Bosnia, and he is assassinated by one of the Serbs because of what had happened. So what does that have to do with us? Well, it's kind of like a fight, like I told you. So let me use an example in class here. Okay, so let's imagine that Kobe, you're Austria-Hungary, all right? You're going to get in a fight after school, all right? Because you heard that Jack has been talking smack about you, right? He said that your feet were too big. Ooh, tough stuff. So Jack and Kobe are going to go fight, right? Well, Tate, you're a little worried about Kobe because, he's kind of a hothead. And maybe you could settle this by talking it out, right? So are you going to go and back up your buddy Kobe to make sure that this thing is settled correctly? Of course. So Tate goes in to support his buddy Kobe. Well, Jack, you have a friend named Isaac. Isaac, aren't you a little worried that it's going to be 2 against 1? I mean, we got Tate and Kobe against Jack. That's not fair. So are you going to go and back up your buddy Jack? Well, of course you are. So now we got 2 against 2, but it doesn't end there. Because Isaac, you have a friend in this class too, don't you? Sure you do. Tate, you're a friend of Isaac's. Well, you know that Isaac kind of hits like a girl. You know what I mean? So are you going to go and make sure that he's safe because he's your friend? Sure. So Tate goes to support Isaac. Isaac is going to support Jack. But it doesn't end there. Tate, you have another friend in this class, don't you? Yes, you do. His name is Sam, right over there, right? Sam, you know that Tate gets a little scared in a fight and he runs away, right? In the middle of the fight. So, are you going to go and make sure that he stands up for his buddies? Sure. So, Sam goes to support Tate, who supports Isaac, who supports Jack. Now, the dumb thing is, Sam, you might not even be good friends with Jack, but yet you're there because of your best friend Tate. Well, that's what happened in this war, okay? So if you look, Austria-Hungary is fighting Serbia now. They go to war because of the assassination. Well, Germany is a friend of Austria-Hungary. So they go to support their friend. It's their ally. Well, Serbia has a friend too. And their friend's name is Russia. And Russia goes to help fight with Serbia because it wouldn't be fair for Germany and Austria to go two against one against Serbia. But Russia has a friend too. Russia's friend is England and France. And those two join in because their friend Russia is in trouble. And guess who's allies with England and France? It's the United States. Yep. So we go to support England and France. What's crazy is the truth is the U.S. probably didn't even really care a whole lot about Serbia, but they did care about their allies like England and France. So because of that, it pulls all these countries into the war. And by the end, we have 60 nations involved. And that is why the assassination of the Archduke pulls the United States in the war. Hopefully that helps you, because I sure didn't understand it when I was in high school. Okay, now we need to look at this from Germany's viewpoint, because I don't always want to say things from the U.S. perspective. Take a look at where Germany is located. Hungary, Italy. These are all the allies there in the Triple Alliance. Notice what's around them. You see how the Triple Entente basically surrounds them in red there? They honestly believed that these countries were working together and that they were going to actually attack. And they had basically all the sides. France was going to come from the west, Russia from the east, and Great Britain had a beautiful navy. They were going to come swooping down from the top and come on into Germany. So Germany decides, well, if we're going to get attacked, we've got to get the jump on them. So we're going to attack first, which makes them look like the bad guy, but actually they're trying to be smart about it because they thought they'd be invaded. So they did what they called the Schlieffen Plan. Boy, is that a German name, huh? So it was actually drawn up in 1897, but they didn't use it until later. And this plan was designed to avoid a two-front war because Germany's kind of smack dab in the middle of everything. The goal was to basically swoop down, as you see in the map, through Belgium and go into France, take out France first, and then they could go and fight on the Russian front. So they went through Belgium, and things went pretty bad for Belgium. They were really brutal to the Belgian people, and we'll talk about some of that evidence later on. But it went pretty slow. And so they do go through and take Belgium, yes. But unfortunately, France slows them down. And so now they're stuck fighting a two-front war, both with the east and the west sides. And that was the idea, the Schlieffen Plan. The machine gun is actually what stops them, because the machine gun just takes out so many people as you charge across that field or that place. So they end up fighting a two-front war. The Schlieffen Plan. I love this political cartoon. And of course, at this point, everybody's pointing fingers at everybody. Who's to blame? The crime of the ages. Who did it? And of course, most people were pointing at Germany. They're the bad guys because they were the ones that attacked first. And they attacked Belgium, who had nothing to do with this at all. They were not even involved. So let's talk about that attack on Belgium. That was actually one of the reasons we got involved in the war, or the war began. There were atrocities done on the people in Belgium. In August of 1914, a document was created called the Bryce Report. And this Bryce Report has all kinds of testimony. They interviewed the Belgian people, and it talked about all the different things they had seen happen to their people in their little towns. They talked about how Germans burned the towns down. They used sniper fire. They would start lighting your house on fire. And if you ran out, they would shoot you. But of course, if you stayed in your house, you burned to death. And there were a lot of cases of that. They also kill a British nurse named Edith Cavell, which is against the rules of war. Never mind that the French do this to 9 German nurses, but of course, this was part of the Bryce Report. There were also stories that were exaggerated, and it made them look like the real bad guys for sure. Like they would take nuns and tie them to church bells and smash them together. They would take babies' heads and smash them together and kill them and put their babies' heads on spikes and stuff like that. That stuff didn't happen, but it was put in this document and people believed it is truth. This is where Germans get the nickname Attila the Hun, that the Hun is the bad guy, the Hun is the German. So in the United States, at this point in history, there is no German speaking allowed. And my relatives were here during that time. My great-grandparents spoke German all the time at home, but they never, ever spoke it outside the house because you were looked at as the dirty German, the bad German. In fact, when my grandfather died, not my great-grandfather, my grandfather died, he fought in World War II and everything. He, on his deathbed, said, I tried my whole life to prove that I was a good German because he was the bad guy in both World War I and World War II. Sauerkraut was not a word we used. They called it Liberty cabbage, things like that. And the Entente, the French side, becomes the defenders of freedom. So you see the Germans start looking like the bad guys. If you look at this propaganda poster, notice it says, remember Belgium, buy bonds, Fourth Liberty Loan. And of course, the German has the pointy hat there. So what do you think they're showing in this poster? Yeah, that he's going to take your daughter and do something very bad to her, right? Yeah. The fourth reason the war begins is the British blockade Germany. Now remember, again, this isn't all one side. What happens in 1914, the British sweep down. If you look up at your map there in the blue area, they bring their big old navy. And especially in that top area there, they block everything from getting into Germany. They block all war goods, which is probably fair at this point, but they also blocked all their food, their oil, their trade, everything. And I mean, at that point, that means they have no tanks. They have no, well, we're getting there. They have no car, oil. They have all that stuff that's missing. So they've got to take action. So Germans come up with a new invention. It's called the submarine because they have to find a way to get through that British blockade because they have so many ships. So you're going to see a lot of British ships are going to get sunk now because of this new invention. You see this pink area on the map, that's where a lot of those German submarines attacked. Okay? All right, at this point, the U.S. sits down and signs a document with the Germans, and it's called the Sussex Pledge. Now, you're going to think this is the most crazy thing in the world. I do too. But again, think about the way they thought of things back then. So this was a promise to the U.S. regarding submarine warfare. Number one, they would not sink any civilian ships. Now, that makes sense to us today, right? Number two, before attacking, German subs had to warn the ship first before they sunk them. Isn't that crazy? So the sub would have to come up and say, by the way, we're going to sink you now. It's ridiculous. Because remember, it wasn't the gentleman's way to sneak up on an enemy. You had to face them head to head. So they didn't think that a submarine was a gentleman's war. They also had some problems. The British were being sneaky too. So here we promise this and have the Germans promise this to us. Well, the British, because they know of these rules, start using passenger ships to hide weapons so that they can get weapons in. And then they realize that if they even fly a U.S. flag on their ship instead of a British flag, the Germans can't shoot it because the U.S. isn't involved in the war yet. Can you predict what's going to happen in the future? you can probably see it coming. If you said they're going to eventually sink a passenger ship or a U.S. ship, you are right about both. Because eventually they know that they're hiding this stuff on these ships. So they're going to sink the wrong ship. Take a look at this cartoon. This is one of my all-time favorites from World War I. It says, John Bull uses the American flag for protection. So up here you see the British guy, and he's speaking in British accent. I'll do my best. Can't you see I'm a bloomin' Yankee? And he's got the American flag up there. And then you got this cute little German. Here's my attempt at German. Are you ready? Who is it on that boat? Yeah, thank you. I'm horrible at it. But he's got this cute, and of course he's got to say who he is, right? Kind of joking about this ridiculous Sussex pledge. All right, number 5, here it is. Eventually, you got it. A German sub sinks the Lusitania, famous ship. May 7th, 1915, they sink this. This was a British passenger liner. The Germans believed it was carrying contraband weapons to the British, and they were right. But it sure didn't make the papers. So people, all they read in the papers was they killed civilians and they sunk this ship. But it did have contraband weapons in the bottom. Absolutely. It killed 1,198 civilians and even 128 Americans. So even though we're out in the war at this point, people are starting to go, I think we might need to get involved. The U.S. and other countries are outraged towards Germany because of unrestricted submarine warfare, quote unquote. The U.S. believed the Germans had violated international law by targeting civilians. And so you're going to see a lot of posters and stuff at this point saying, avenge the Lusitania, remember the Lusitania. This one here is actually an Irish poster. It says, join the Irish regiment, avenge the Lusitania. Okay, let's see here. I just got to check one thing. Okay, so the next cause of the war that gets us involved in the U.S. pretty much is the Zimmerman telegram. Now, if you're in my class, you'll actually get a chance to try to break this code. It's not the actual Zimmerman telegram because you could look up the answer on the internet, but we're using the exact same code that they did with the Zimmerman telegram. But this was actually sent to Mexico from Germany. The British intercepted it, and they deciphered it, and they held on to it for just the right moment. And then they gave it to the United States at the right moment when they needed help. So let's find out what's going on with that. Here's what it said. Oops, back we go. Back. Shoot. Okay. So remember, this is written to Mexico from Germany, right? We intend to begin on the 1st of February unrestricted submarine warfare. We shall endeavor in spite of this to keep the U.S. of America neutral. In the event of this not succeeding, we make Mexico a proposal of alliance on the following basis. Make war together, make peace together, generous financial support, and an understanding on our part that Mexico is to reconquer the lost territory in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. The settlement in detail is left to you. You will inform the President of the above most secretly as soon as the outbreak of war with the U.S. of America is certain, and add the suggestion that he should use on his own initiative, invite Japan to immediate adherence, and at the same time mediate between Japan and ourselves. Please call the President's attention to the fact that the ruthless employment of our submarines now offers the prospect of compelling England in a few months to make peace. Signed, Zimmerman. So what do the Germans want Mexico to do? I'll give you a second to answer that. Yep. They want Mexico to invade the United States and take back Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Now, do you think that Germany thought Mexico could take the U.S. out? No, of course not. They were using Mexico. Why would they ask Mexico to do this? I think some of you are on the right track. You're right. If they were busy fighting Mexico, they would be less apt to come over and fight Germany in World War I. So they were hoping Mexico would help them and keep them busy, and then we wouldn't be over in Europe. You're right. Okay, so let's look at the details of this deal. So the British, like I said, intercepted this in 1916. But they don't show the U.S. this document until 1917, at the moment they needed a push and tried, because they've been trying to get us in the war for a while, and they finally needed this push. What did they do? They didn't hand it to us. They printed it in the newspaper. The U.S. citizens were furious, so mad, and it did exactly what they wanted. It turned the tide, and people were like, we need to go get Germany. We need to fight Mexico. They were just mad. And we talked about why they did this, obviously. Okay, we've talked about the Sussex Pledge already. I don't know why that's there. Number 7, the last straw. Germans sink 4 merchant U.S. ships. 36 U.S. sailors are killed in this attack, and that is the final straw. The U.S. decides to join the war, and of course, think about it. If we had sailors killed as one of our ships was attacked, what would we do today? We would probably get involved, right? So we get pulled in, of course, and we're off to war, and we side with the Entente side, right? Or the Allies. The Yanks are coming. President calls for war declaration, stronger Navy, new army of 500,000 men, full cooperation with Germany's foes. Yes, here we go. All right, so we start mobilization of war. Of course, the boys that signed up were always promised and told that they'd be home by Christmas. And they heard that every single year of the war. Unfortunately, it wasn't quite as fast as they thought. Now, remember, they hadn't had a major war in 50 years. Been a long, long time. So these guys are excited. They want to go in, be able to wear that uniform because the girls are thinking you're looking pretty good. And they thought it'd be over so quickly that they wanted to get in before they missed out on it. Every young man kind of wanted to do that. Also, in 1917, we passed the U.S. Elective Service Act, which was basically conscription. We passed a draft that said all men ages 21 to 30 had to sign up for the military. And then they never did actually have to draft people, but it was the beginning of signing up for the military at a certain age. We had so many people volunteer in the war, didn't last as long while we were involved, so they didn't have to draft. Now notice the age of the draft. When do you guys sign up for the military right now? 18. So our soldiers are a little bit older in World War I. Not to say they're all that old, because I actually just watched a movie about a couple of guys. One was 16 and one was 15 in this movie. And they signed up and just lied about their age, actually. Now, what I'd like you to do, if you can, is go ahead and play this song. It's A Long Way to Tipperary. And kind of listen to it. This was a really popular song at that time. And take a look at the words, okay? I'll give you a moment to do that. Isn't that a cool song? And you notice they're talking about that sweet girl that kissed him goodbye. Goodbye to all these places in England, in this case. Piccadilly, farewell, Leicester Square. And we're going to miss you, basically. Take a look at all the stuff that the soldiers wore in World War I. We've got a gas mask for the first time ever. We've got ammo pouches for bullets, his cape, grenades, water bottle, shovel, boots, putties, bayonet, eating tin, helmet, haversack, which we had in the Civil War, if you remember, and of course his rifle. We'll go into more detail about some of those things later on. So these boys that went to fight in the U.S. were called doughboys. 4.3 million U.S. doughboys served. And what I'd like you to do, believe it or not, they have actual video footage of the doughboys training. There usually isn't any sound, but you can see them actually go through gas mask training and work on their rifles. And there's also pilot training, which is really interesting. So take a moment if you can and take a look at some of those videos. They're pretty cool. in class, we actually will have a doughboy training day, so I hope you can be here for that. It's a lot of fun. We go into the wrestling room and do some scenarios. Let's just say that. It's a lot of good time. Take a look at some of the recruitment posters that we saw. Of course, I want you for the U.S. Army. You've seen that one. London Opinion, your country needs you, right? But you'll see that soldiers looked very different in this war because we had so many different countries and they had so many different uniforms. So a lot of these slides are just pictures of people. Take a look. This is what an Australian looked like. These are Central Powers. Austro-Hungarians on the left. A German soldier on the right says farewell to his mother. French recruits. Take a look at the hat. Very unique. German boy pretends to be a soldier. Isn't he cute? Notice how our soldiers mobilized in France, Germany, Russia, and Britain. Millions. France, almost 9 million. Germany, 11 million. Russia, 12 million. Britain, 9 million. 9 million boys. So let's look at what the women did in this war effort a little bit. So we're going to kind of list some of those roles in your notes, and I'll just show you pictures of them as we go. Take a look at how they're appealing to a certain sense in this poster. My daddy bought me a government bond of the Third Liberty Loan. Did yours? So who are they appealing to? Yeah, maybe that young kid or that mother. Like, oh, why didn't you do yours for your kid? Why didn't you fight for the war by buying these bonds and give that to your daughter, right? They're getting them involved. I want you for the Navy. Promotion for anyone enlisting. Apply any recruiting station or postmaster. Women did serve certain roles in the Navy. They were munition workers. They made tanks and planes and guns and all that stuff. They're working in the factories to help out the war effort. Here's a picture of a French factory. German women also worked in factories, like you see here. Remember, it's the beginning of industry. Working in the fields. A lot of the boys were farmers and they were fighting. So these women had to take over the farm. They also worked in the fields to make food for our soldiers as well, or food for the people at home who couldn't get any supplies in. A woman could be an ambulance driver, a Red Cross nurse. Although they were told not to wear makeup, they couldn't wear perfume, they had to make sure everything was covered, and they dressed just so because you didn't dare be inappropriate in front of the boys. I actually just watched an episode thing on that. It's interesting. Women were in the Army Auxiliary, the girl behind the gun, right? You kind of just supported them, maybe sent packages, kind of helped them out, even helped out within the hometown about some of the things they needed. Russian women were even a little more different. They fought just like the men. They did anything a man would do. And a lot of those women came home wounded, scarred, and older was the way they described it. And most of those women will die unmarried because they weren't as ladylike anymore after what they had experienced. Now we have some famous women. This is one of those that we'll be hearing about. We're going to do some trading cards later on. This is Mata Hari. There's her real name there for you. But she was a really, really famous German spy. She has a very interesting story that we'll hear about when we talk about our famous people. So women could be spies. So we're going to talk about strategy and weapons tomorrow. So come back and join us for part 2. Have a great day.